Where this started for me was when I was doing my research on the budget. I'm on the Budget Committee, I'm on the Joint Economic Committee, and I told my staff, give me everything that you possibly can about where we stand as a nation in terms of our fiscal house. And what they sent me was a stack of documents that was literally 3 feet high. On the very top was this. On the very top was a line that's, from a gentleman who said that he thought the greatest risk to our national security was our debt. Now, if a politician had said that, I might have discarded it. I might have written it off as simple political spin. But it wasn't a politician. It was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And when the gentleman who controls the guns and the tanks and the planes tells me and everybody else that he thinks the biggest risk to our national security is our debt, that got my attention. I hope it gets yours. It's what drove me to start to have these meetings. One of the first things I learned was that I didn't understand the numbers. The numbers are simply too large. The difference between $1.6 trillion and $1.6 billion doesn't sound like it's that much. So what I did for my own purposes was try and break it down into numbers that I can understand. And here's what I've been telling people for the last couple of weeks. I want you to imagine that as a nation, we're a family, and we're sitting around the kitchen table, and we're trying to come up with a budget for this year. And we make $46,000 a year. That's what we bring home as a family, $46,000. And when we add up the rent or the mortgage, the grocery bill, the gas bill, everything that we have to pay, we're spending $78,000 a year. We're making 46, we're spending 78. So we're spending $32,000 that we don't have. And then as we're sitting around that table, the third piece of this puzzle is that the Visa bill, which is in the drawer, is $281,000. Those numbers, making $46,000, spending $78,000 with a Visa bill of $281,000 is exactly where we stand as a nation. Those numbers correlate exactly to where we are. The next thing that I saw when I went through the research was this graph. And this is the one that really drove home for me where we stood, how deep the hole was, and how difficult it was going to be for us to get out. If you look at this, what it shows you is our debt as a percentage of our total income. If you took all of the incomes that all of the people and the businesses made in this country and added it all up, that's our national income. Some people refer to it as GDP, but it's our national income. And if you look at our debt historically, what you see is that during World War II, as you can imagine, our debt was fairly high. In fact, it was the first time or last time in our lifetimes that the debt exceeded 100% of our national income. You could see that it went down for many, many years. And then in the 1980s, for those of you who think that Ronald Reagan did a great job of balancing the budgets and cutting spending, we changed. And the country started to grow its debt as a percentage of its national income. Here's where we are today, and here's where we're going, and this is what really frightens me. By the way, the numbers that you see here, these are not Republican numbers, these are not Democrat numbers. In fact, if you'll see in the next couple of minutes, I'm equally critical of both parties because they're both responsible for where we are. But these numbers are simply the current law applied to the demographics of the United States. This is not a partisan presentation of the facts. This is what will happen if we don't change. What's so disturbing about it in the short term is that once you get about where we are now, once the debt is so large as a percentage of our national income, we start to lose jobs at a fairly dramatic rate. In fact, we're seeing that in today's economy. What's more disturbing as you go out just a couple of years is that no government has ever been able to survive this. No government has ever been able to take on 300, 400, 500% of its national income in debt. It simply doesn't happen. So what we're saying is that unless something very dramatically different happens in the near future, the nation's in a lot of difficulty. Where's the money going? The graph that you see here shows two different things. You hear us talk about mandatory spending versus discretionary spending. Discretionary spending are the things that Congress votes on every single year. And you can see on this graph there's things for education. Defense is obviously the largest portion of the discretionary budget. But there's also things we don't vote on every single year. We call those mandatory spending, and it's also called entitlement spending. And as you can see, most of the money, in fact, the majority of the money that we spend every single year happens automatically. It happens in Social Security, it happens in Medicare, it happens in Medicaid. People ask me, why is it so hard to balance the budget? Well, one of the things is that you have to address these permanent entitlement programs. It is not possible to balance the budget without reforming the entitlement programs. It's simply not going to happen. If you want to balance the budget in the United States of America, you have to figure out a way to reform Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. speaking of those three, the major entitlement programs, what if we do nothing? What if we do nothing over the course of the next several years? And you can see within our lifetimes, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid would take up every penny that we make as a nation. Every single dollar that we bring in tax revenue would go to those three programs only. There'd be no money left for defense. And of course, there's something left off of this graph, which is interest. So it drives home how important it is, how these things are the drivers of our debt. But all of this is, you know, there's a lot of information. I certainly had a lot of information. I had a 3-foot-high stack of documents that I went through in my preparation for the budget debate this year. And I asked my staff very late in the process, look, give me 2 numbers. Give me only 2 numbers. Break it down for me as simply as you possibly can. Show me the revenues of the United States over, say, the next 75 years, and show me the interest payment on the debt. And as you can see, by the year 2055, unless we do something dramatically different, every penny that we bring in tax revenues will go to pay off one thing only, and that is the interest payments on the debt. It's not even for principal reductions. It's just interest. No money for defense, no money for Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, no money for the FAA, the FDA, border security, nothing. That's how big the problem has been. People ask me all the time, how do you fix it? And certainly we're starting now on talking about how to fix it. Folks come to me and say, well, what if you just cut all of foreign aid? In that world, go back to the kitchen table where we're making $46,000 a year, we're spending $78,000, we're trying to save $32,000. In that world, the foreign aid budget, every single penny that we spend overseas amounts to about $920. It's a big chunk of money, there's no question, but you can't balance the budget like that. We actually cut our own budgets in Congress. One of the first things we did this year was cut our own budgets, our allowances to run our offices. About $35 million is about 5%, and it saved $35 million. In that world where we're trying to cut $32,000 from our family budget, that $35 million represents 70 cents. So you sort of get a feel, again, for how big the numbers are. You know, the one question I get most, I think, on the town hall tours is, what does all this have to do with jobs? And it has everything to do with jobs. Very simply put, when the government spends more money, private industry spends less. And when private industry spends less, fewer people go to work. You can see it over the course of the last 20 years. In fact, I could show it to you back 40, 50, 60 years. Private investment is what grows jobs. You know, several folks have come to me and said, well, look, we balanced the budget in the 1990s and taxes were much higher then. And I say, look, here's what happened in the 1990s. Here's what happened during the Clinton administration. Give credit to the Clintons if you want to. Give credit to the Republicans in the House at the time if you want to. But during the mid to late 1990s, the size of the federal government went down dramatically. This graph shows the number of federal employees who were working for the government during that period of time. A dramatic reduction in the size of the government. And look what happens to unemployment when federal spending goes down. Look at what happens during the Clinton administration from 1992 to 2000. Government spending came down dramatically and unemployment came down dramatically as well. That's because when the government spends less, business spends more, and people go back to work. I've mentioned to you today that most of the numbers that you've seen here are from the Congressional Budget Office. They're nonpartisan numbers. This last graph that I'll show you before I wrap up is a partisan document. There's no question about it. This is the Ryan budget. This is the committee budget that I worked on this year in our committee, the budget that I voted for, and this is what it does to that tidal wave of debt graph. And you can see that at least it shows us a way out of the tunnel. Do I have difficulties with? Yeah, sure I do. It takes 26 years to balance the budget under the Ryan program. It exposes us as a nation to continued risks for the next 26 years before we get our fiscal house in order. But I thought it was a good first step and a good starting point for the debate. Listen, that's the best I can do in 8 to 10 minutes. I do hope you get a chance to come and see the longer presentation at one of the town hall meetings. Other places on this website you can go and find out where we're going to be in the next couple of weeks and months, but I do hope you get a chance to do it. As always, email, call the office, send us a note, whatever. We'll be happy to answer any questions you have and give you whatever any information that you might need to understand this issue better. Thanks very much.